The doors sealed behind me before I even reached the center of the hall, and that was the first sign that I was not walking into a normal meeting. My name is Daniel Hart, and 3 hours earlier, I had been reviewing shipping routes for a small human trade post on the edge of Vashtir space. Now I stood alone in a golden chamber the size of a stadium, surrounded by thousands of alien eyes, with no idea why I had been summoned, or why the guards behind me were not letting me leave. A voice echoed from above, deep and layered, like several beings speaking in unison. You stand at the center of the Dominion, because the Dominion has run out of other options. I turned in a slow circle. Pillars of black stone rose around me, each one etched with symbols I did not recognize. Somewhere far above, hidden in the haze, a council was watching me, the way you watch an animal that has wandered into a trap it does not understand yet. 2 figures stepped forward from opposite sides of the hall. Both were tall, both moved with the kind of confidence that comes from being raised to rule something. One wore silver armor etched with flame patterns. The other wore deep blue robes that seemed to drink the light around her. I did not know their names yet, but I understood immediately that they were important, and that I was standing exactly between them for a reason. The voice from above continued. These are the last 2 claimants to the throne of the Dominion, Illyra of the Ashcrown line, and Cyril of the Voidglass line, equal in blood, equal in right, equal in support among our people. Our law says that when no side can be favored from within, judgment must come from beyond our world, from a mind untouched by our history. You are the first human ever brought before this council. Today, your choice becomes law. For a moment, I thought I had misheard the translation device in my ear. Then I looked at the 2 women in front of me, both watching me without blinking, both carrying the weight of an empire on their shoulders, and I understood that I had not misheard anything at all. I want to be clear about something. I am not a diplomat by training. I am not a soldier. I did not come to this world to decide who would rule an empire of trillions of lives. I came to negotiate fuel prices for cargo ships. And yet here I was, being told that whichever way I pointed my hand in the next few minutes would decide the future of an entire civilization. Illyra spoke first. Her voice was calm, measured, the voice of someone who had practiced calm her whole life. Choose wisely, human. My line has guided this empire for 11 generations. Order exists because of us. Without a strong hand, the outer systems will fall into chaos within a season. Cyril answered before I could respond. Her voice had a different texture, sharper, quicker, like she had spent years fighting to be heard in rooms that did not want to hear her. And my line has spent those 11 generations watching millions suffer under that order. Strength without fairness is not strength. It is only control. I looked between them, 2 women, 2 philosophies, 2 futures for a species I barely understood, and somehow, I was the tool that would decide which one survived. The council above grew restless. I could hear murmurs rippling through the crowd, a mixture of curiosity and impatience. Somewhere in that crowd were generals who commanded fleets larger than anything humanity had ever built. Somewhere in that crowd were merchants whose fortunes depended on which house controlled trade law. Somewhere in that crowd were ordinary citizens who had traveled great distances just to watch a stranger from another world decide their fate in a matter of minutes. I felt the weight of every one of those eyes. The eldest counselor leaned forward, his voice sharp with warning. Time grows short, Ambassador. Choose a house, or the Dominion itself may fracture beneath us before nightfall. That threat should have frightened me into rushing. Instead, it did the opposite. It slowed me down. Because I realized something in that moment that none of them seemed to have considered. They had brought me here because I had no stake in their history, no loyalty to either house, no reason to bend toward flame patterns or deep blue robes. But they had made one mistake. They assumed that having no stake meant I would still play by their rules. I looked up at the haze where the council sat hidden, and I spoke loud enough for the entire hall to hear. You want my judgment to be final and binding. You said so yourself, but you never said my judgment has to be one of your two names. The murmuring stopped. Every alien eye in that chamber locked onto me at once. Alira's composure flickered, just slightly. Cyril tilted her head, studying me now with something closer to curiosity than defiance. I kept going, because stopping now felt more dangerous than finishing. You built a system where only one bloodline can hold power at a time, and now that system has produced two equally worthy claimants who cannot agree, and instead of fixing the system, you are asking an outsider to paper over the crack with a single name. That is not justice. That is convenience dressed up as tradition. The eldest counselor's voice cracked through the hall, sharp with disbelief. You dare rewrite the laws of an empire older than your entire species? I did not dare rewrite anything, I said. I am simply pointing out that your law never required me to pick a person. It required me to render judgment. So here is my judgment. No single line should hold enough power to break an empire just by being born into the wrong century at the wrong time. That is not stability. That is a fracture waiting to happen, and you already know it, because you are standing here today proving it. Silence spread through the hall like water finding every low point in the ground. I turned to Alira first. You said order exists because of your line. Maybe that has been true. But order that depends entirely on one bloodline is fragile order. It only survives as long as that bloodline produces someone capable. What happens in the generation that does not? Alira did not answer immediately. For the first time since I had entered the hall, she looked less like a queen and more like a person actually considering a question she had never been allowed to ask herself. I turned to Cyril. And you said strength without fairness is only control. I agree. But fairness without structure is chaos, and chaos costs lives just as easily as control does. You cannot build a future for trillions of people on passion alone. You need both what your line believes and what her line has built. Cyril's sharp expression softened, just slightly, into something more thoughtful. I turned back toward the haze above, where the council sat waiting for a verdict they had not expected. My judgment is this. Neither house rules alone, a joint regency, both lines represented, both accountable to the same council, both required to answer to the people they claim to serve. If this empire cannot survive two houses sharing one table, then it was never truly stable to begin with. It was only quiet, and quiet is not the same as strong. The chamber erupted into sound, thousands of voices rising at once, some in protest, some in surprise, some in something that almost sounded like relief. The eldest counselor rose from his seat, his voice booming over the crowd. This has never been done in the history of the Dominion. Then maybe it is time your history included something new, I said. For a long moment nothing happened. The council did not respond. The two princesses stood beside me, neither one moving, both watching the reaction of the crowd instead of me. And then, slowly, something shifted in the room. The generals who had looked ready to protest began speaking quietly among themselves. The merchants, who had worried about which house would control trade law, began to realize that a joint regency might actually protect their interests better than either house alone. The citizens in the upper rows, the ones who had traveled so far just to see a verdict, began to applaud, first a few, then dozens, then what felt like the entire hall. The eldest counselor tried twice more to object, but each time his voice was swallowed by the growing sound of agreement rising from every level of the chamber. Finally, he lowered his head, and in a voice much quieter than before, he spoke the words that made everything official. Let it be recorded. The judgment of the outsider stands. A joint regency shall govern the Dominion, both lines equal, both accountable, both bound to the same law. I felt my knees nearly give out from relief, though I kept my expression steady. Alira turned to me, her earlier composure returning, though it looked different now, less like armor and more like genuine calm. You did not choose either of us, she said quietly. And somehow that was the only choice that let us both keep what actually mattered. Cyril laughed softly beside her, shaking her head in disbelief. Next time bring something to eat, she said. That was the best political theater this empire has seen in centuries. I did not fully understand the joke, but I understood the feeling behind it well enough. 3 days later, I was back on my ship, finishing the very same fuel negotiations that had brought me to Vashtir space in the first place, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. But everyone who had been in that hall knew better. Word of what happened spread quickly across the Dominion and beyond it, reaching systems that had never even heard of humanity before that day. They had forced a human to choose between two princesses, expecting a simple answer, a single name, a quick end to their crisis. Instead, they got a question turned back on themselves, one that made an entire empire look at its own foundations and ask whether tradition alone was ever really strength. I never set out to change an empire. I only wanted better fuel prices for a handful of cargo ships. But sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest refusals, the moment someone simply says, "I will not choose the choice you gave me, because there is a better one you never considered." And that, more than anything else, is what silenced a room full of beings who had ruled the stars long before humanity ever left its own solar system.